Welcome you all to this very interesting, important session. So Gracjan and myself are co-chairing this session because we don't know each other. We have not met Professor Vanaik, of course, was my teacher at Delhi University, so I know him, and we have not met, many of us. Therefore, the way that we move ahead is to give a short introduction of ourselves rather than somebody introducing me or you. So myself, Professor Akhil Dutta, I teach at Guwahati University, Political Science, India. I have been associated with Rise of Asia programs for last 3 or 4 years. My area of interest has been political economy, also the way the politics has been unfolding in India. My forthcoming book is on Hindutva in Assam, Hindutva regime in Assam. So I welcome you all to this session and look forward to listening to you. Gracjan, you introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everybody. I am Gracjan Cimek. I am now a professor in Institute of International Relations, Polish Naval Academy in Gdynia, in Poland. My research are focused on Russia, geopolitics, neoliberalism, globalization from the critical perspective. So nice to be here with you, and I think that there would be much more interesting content in our session. Thanks.
Okay, Hudson, yeah.
Yes, hello, I'm Achin Vanaik. I'm a retired professor of international relations from the University of Delhi, and I've been a founding member of what's called the Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament and Peace, which was set up in 2000 after the India-Pakistan nuclear tests, and I look forward to participating in this session.
Okay, great. Welcome, sir. Yeah. Hudson, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kate Hudson. I'm General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which is Britain's largest and most long-standing mass peace organisation. I'm pleased to say that we have cooperation with Professor Vanaik's organisation too.
Yes, indeed.
Long-standing cooperation. By profession, I'm a historian and a former academic before I worked full-time for the campaign. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Okay, most welcome. Azril Bakal, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it will be great. Yeah.
It's fine. So we give it different colors to the conversation. No problem. So I'm retired, but still active. So I still do some teaching in Sweden, in Mexico, sometimes in Peru. I'm by background an agricultural engineer, turned into sociologist with some background in anthropology. My recent work has to do with ethnicity, ethnic identity, and I was quite inspired by Rashni Kothari when he was speaking about the worst damage of colonialism at the level of identity. So I followed that line, and I'm in touch with his son that continues the tradition of his father, Rashni Kothari, Ashish, and the global tapestry of alternatives. So I'm editing a book on transformative research and education with Emerald. It's a small collective of researchers in different corners of the world. I'm engaged, well, I've been an activist since day one at the university in Peru and continue to be engaged in Friends of the Earth, Fridays for the Future, climate justice, World Social Forum, and the like. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think Nilofar has not yet joined back. Dimitris, I'm not sure. Darius, can you?
Yes,
just,
he is there. He is there, Dimitris.
Okay, Dimitris, please.
What do you want me to do? To
Yeah.
myself?
You just give a short introduction.
I'm not good in describing myself.
No, but then
I prefer that Darvish is doing it. Anyway, I will do it. So I have studied physics and information processing. Then I have done a lot of jobs. Essentially, I'm a journalist and a writer. For a period of time, I was in the office of the Greek Prime Minister Andreas Papandreou, who had a huge interest on questions of arms control and East-West. He was one of the 6 leaders who took the initiative of the 6, if you remember. Then, as I have begun to understand that what is happening in the Soviet Union becomes to get a cardinal importance, I went there as a correspondent of the Greek news agency and of different other news outlets. So I followed the last 2 years of Perestroika and the Yeltsin years there. Then I came back to Greece. I worked as a journalist and analyst on international policy. And when the West has launched the economic war against my country, I was involved in all those movements that developed, including in Syriza, and I was in the secretariat of Syriza. Then we still try to survive as a country. We participate in those efforts of survival, not very successful up to now. And at the same time, we are trying to try to unite the disparate forces of critical thinking around the world, especially with this site, Defend Democracy Press. I don't know if it is satisfying. Is it okay?
Okay.
Eleftheria y Thanatos.
Yeah.
Yes, but
okay. So Nilofar, yeah. A very short introduction of
Hello,
yourself.
everybody.
Yeah.
I'm a senior journalist and a writer, and I have a keen interest in communication studies and nuclear diplomacy. I have a mixed background where education is concerned, but I've been writing on the subjects that interest me for a very, very long time, largely applying a communication-oriented approach. And having been in India, which is a multi-secular country, and also having stayed in America for quite some time, I have kept a close eye on the media of most of the countries. That helps in giving an interesting picture in painting about NAM and other organizations as well. People-to-people communication have been giving a lot of importance to while studying any issue. It's important to look at issues, in my perspective, not just from what the media says, but how the impact of the media plays a role. And I hope to elaborate on these points during my paper. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Gracjan, could you like to add anything or should move ahead?
Yes, move ahead.
Okay. So again, we take the privilege to welcome you all to this very important panel, and we have an exciting panel from different backgrounds. We'll not take time. I think we can continue up to Indian time 4:45 p.m.
Yeah, exactly. 12. Yeah, it will be 12:15 in Paris. So we 11:15 in UK.
Okay, so we have 1 hour 15 minutes. We don't have much time. So my idea is that we'll not intervene. If every one of you can speak for 12 minutes, then it will take 60 minutes. Then we'll have another 15 minutes for discussion. I think it's very difficult to elaborate in 12 minutes, but let us try to manage it and move ahead. So we don't have any introductory note from the chairs. We invite all speakers to speak, in the way the names have been mentioned in the agenda, I take the privilege to welcome Hudson to make her presentation.
Myself first?
Thank you.
Hudson, sir.
It's me.
Hudson.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. Please, could you tell me when I've had 10 minutes so I know that I've got 2 minutes to conclude my remarks. So hopefully I won't be too long. So I'm speaking about Europe's struggle for nuclear disarmament. Many of you may be aware that this has been a very long and difficult struggle. The most well-known period of mobilization against nuclear weapons was in the 1980s, when the United States planned and then eventually did bring cruise and Pershing missiles to Western Europe. And there was a massive mobilization of CND and many others against the sighting of those missiles. The struggle against them was successful. They were removed by the INF Treaty, which was signed in the late 1980s. Of course, we now know also that that treaty has been destroyed by former President Trump. So the future of that class of missiles is now uncertain. Generally speaking, people assume that the only nuclear weapons in Europe are those of France and the UK, both declared nuclear weapon states under the NPT, both claiming independent arsenals, let's say, and of course we know that that's not the case with the UK. The UK arsenal is really part of the US force. But in addition to those, it's also the case that US nuclear weapons are stationed across Europe under the auspices of NATO. And there is a lot of opposition within those countries to the presence of nuclear weapons there, including at a state level, I should say. It's not just campaigns that protest about it, but the US has consistently refused to withdraw them, saying that it's a NATO decision and all NATO states would have to agree to their withdrawal. So what's the current status of this arsenal? There are approximately 150 American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs stationed in 5 countries in Europe. That's to say Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Turkey. Often, or generally speaking, governments of those countries refuse to comment on whether the nuclear weapons exist there or not, but there have been a number of high-level individuals, such as the former Italian president, the former Dutch prime minister, who've confirmed that indeed those arsenals are located there. The nuclear sharing agreement is part of NATO defense policy, and in peacetime, the nuclear weapons stored in non-nuclear countries are guarded by US forces. There is a dual code system which is activated in a time of war. When these bombs were initially deployed in Western Europe, the targets were Eastern European states. But of course, those states, after the end of the Cold War, largely became part of the European Union and are largely part of NATO itself. So the continuance of these missiles, this continued stationing of these missiles is anachronistic, and it remains provocative, destabilizing, and dangerous. So where are these bombs to be found? Up to 20 bombs are stored at each of the following: the Kleine Bruegel Air Base in Belgium, the Buchel Air Base in Germany, and the Volkel Air Base in the Netherlands. And they are all continually under regular pressure from campaigners, particularly the Buchel Air Base in Germany. Very regular major protests to keep these weapons in the public eye. around 70 bombs are stored in Italy, and they're distributed between the Aviano and Gedi air bases. Now, interestingly and very positively from the point of view of UK campaigners, I'm pleased to let you know that there used to be 100 of these bombs stored at the Lakenheath air base in East Anglia, but these were removed in 2008. And apparently the reporting said this was as a result of the scale of the protest at the airbase and also in the wake of the massive anti-war protests in Britain. So it was deemed better to remove them elsewhere. So I think that that's an indication of the real impact that popular campaigning and mobilization can have. So that ended 50 years of US nuclear weapons, sort of directly controlled US nuclear weapons in Britain. Meanwhile, an estimated 50 bombs are stored at the Incirlik air base in Turkey, and these have recently been the subject of some debate and controversy, because while Turkey, of course, is officially an ally of the US and a member of NATO, there have been tensions in the last couple of years with the Turkish president, who even in December 2019, just over a year ago, threatened to close the base, which would leave the status of the nuclear weapons unclear. So opposition to these nuclear weapons and the struggle to remove them from Europe is very much a mobilizing and a kind of protest and vigil focus, but also there's a legal component also to the protests against these nuclear weapons, particularly in terms of the provisions of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I imagine you're familiar with. But there's a very strong legal case, which is often argued by senior barristers and so on, that having US nuclear bombs in Europe conflicts with the legal obligations of the signatories to the NPT. This is because Articles 1 and 2 of the treaty forbid the transfer of nuclear weapons to non-nuclear weapons states. And of course, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy and Turkey are all non-nuclear weapon states under the NPT. So these nuclear weapons should not be transferred to them. So the US argues that transfer and control to the non-nuclear weapon states does not occur until wartime, when the treaty no longer applies. So that's how they try and get around that. But of course, that doesn't deal with the fact that they have already transferred, illegally transferred those nuclear weapons to those countries. So the controversy continues. And there's another area of debate and concern which arises, and that is the kind of the level and grading of these weapons, and that's to say that they are tactical nuclear weapons with a kind of a relatively smaller payload, let's say, than the missiles which are fired from ballistic missile submarines, for example. These free-fall gravity bombs are defined as tactical nuclear weapons. They're smaller. So a B-61 bomb is generally, therefore, understood to be more usable than strategic nuclear weapons. So there's always this debate about if you've got some nuclear weapons, you can just go out in the plane, drop them on a target. That's a much lower threshold of use than if you've got a great big Trident missile submarine going around and you have to launch these huge warheads on missiles and so on. That's a much more difficult thing to use. So the debate around sort of so-called usable nuclear weapons affects not only things like these B-61s at these bases, but also, of course, former President Trump's decision last year to deploy a new class of so-called usable nuclear weapons. So these are part of the lowering of the threshold of potential nuclear weapons use because of them being perceived as being kind of smaller, more usable, less dangerous, and so on. So that's also a very, very controversial issue about these nuclear weapons. Sometimes people think, oh, well, they're just a hangover from the Cold War. Do we really need to worry about them? They'll be phased out when their shelf life expires and so on. But no, that is not the case. In 2013, the US administration initiated a life extension program for the current B-61 models, extending their life by up to 30 years and significantly enhancing their capabilities. So the new model can be accurately steered, it's earth penetrating, it's got an adjustable yield, and so on. So the question of what are these bombs for, located as they are in Europe, what are these bombs for, where are they going to be used? It's a kind of destabilizing factor of significant importance. So the position of the movement in this regard, our view, of course, is that the US should withdraw all tactical nuclear weapons from Europe. We want to ensure compliance with the NPT and deal with their illegal status. And also we want to end the possibility that non-nuclear countries may adopt nuclear roles on behalf of nuclear powers. And that is a danger, particularly when you have a situation of increasing tension. So we want the withdrawal of all US and NATO nuclear weapons from Europe. And of course, that would then be part of encouraging the wider reduction or withdrawal of nuclear weapons. And here in Britain, where we have our own, as it were, nuclear arsenal, you know, we see very much this as part of a whole process of removing nuclear weapons from Europe. And indeed, Chair, just to conclude, we have a new activist initiative, a campaign for a nuclear weapons-free Europe. This was very powerful in the 80s, as I referred to earlier on, but this is being regenerated and revived to make sure that we really do have movement towards getting rid of these US nuclear weapons. So last year, on the occasion of the 75th commemoration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was a new call to establish a European nuclear weapon-free zone as a matter of urgency. And the demands include the end to the modernization of all nuclear weapons, which is taking place across the board, an end to nuclear sharing, which is illegal, as I've described, and that all states should sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which I mentioned in my talk on Wednesday. You know, a number of European countries have signed up to the TPNW. This must be universalized across Europe. So COVID permitting, Chair, we will be mobilizing later in the year at bases across Europe to really bring this messaging home to both governments and populations in the countries of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Hudson, for your presentation. So we'll keep the discussion towards the later part of it after every presentation is made, and we'll go for the discussion. I'm not taking time. May I now invite our friend Dimitris for the presentation?
Thank you. It's a honor for me.
It's 12 minutes. Yeah.
Sorry?
12 minutes.
Yes.
Talking about the time. You have.
No, it's a big honor for me to succeed in the floor, Kate Hudson, a veteran of the struggle for survival of humanity and a protagonist also. But me, I'm not British, I'm Greek. It is nearly an insult to say to a Greek to speak only for 12 minutes. You are putting me an impossible task. I will try to abide anyway. I hope I will not destroy the meaning I want to convey. So the collapse of the Soviet Union, the period of this era, has been, we have seen during this era the signature of a series of agreements to control armaments, which were considered at that time as historical agreements. Supposedly, they were the symbols of the end of the Cold War and of the beginning of a period of eternal sort of Kantian peace. We now know that it was nothing of that. And even from some aspects, the world situation, like it is evolving now, it is more dangerous than during the Cold War. The only thing that the Soviet collapse was able to achieve, it was to leave unchecked Western capitalism. That is also to create the illusion of a omnipotence to the West, and especially the two strategic, so to say, powers of the West, the United States and Israel. Also, it encouraged inside the imperialistic centers the most extremist forces, which have since somehow organized themselves in a kind of international informal party under the beginning, in the beginning led by people like Cheney, Netanyahu, Perl, Wolfowitz, etc. This is the party which took power in the United States in 2001, and it launched the chain of the wars and interventions in the Middle East. Under Obama's presidency, it has a little bit retreated. They had to accept the cancelling of their project of a new American massive invasion in Syria and of a war against Iran. But it continued its activity in other fronts, and it even expanded it in the region of the former Soviet Union. This is a party which came back to power with Trump, with sometimes with different representatives, but with a stable and continuous presence, the presence of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who during Trump seemed even to somehow dictate the American foreign policy. In the field of the nuclear armaments, the first thing that did the administration of Bush Jr. was to withdraw from the ABM treaty. This treaty has become possible because a large part of the United States establishment understood after the Cuban Missile Crisis how close we came to a disaster. And it understood also that it accepted the fact that it could not win a nuclear war. The logic of this treaty was which was a matter, of course, way, but a mad treaty which was the only cure to a mad world somehow, by forbidding the development of anti-ballistic missiles. The two superpowers, nuclear superpowers, the two nuclear rivals, they wanted to make impossible a surprise first attack, because the side which would receive this attack would be able to answer to it by a devastating counterattack. And this is why the other side, all the sides had not to be able to be defended towards a nuclear attack. In a way, the ABM treaty, we must understand it as an effort to put in legal terms the decision of the two superpowers not to go to nuclear war, to forbid them the possibility of going to a nuclear war. the fact that the United States abolished, they have withdrawn from the IBM Treaty, has to be understood as the main indication that they put, even if they don't say that, as the real aim, the victory in a nuclear conflict. This is what they are pushing. Trump went more to this direction by abolishing the INF Treaty, as Kate has said before, the Euro Missile Treaty, and he almost abolished the START Treaty, which was saved finally, because the treaty, I mean, for the reduction of the strategic nuclear arms, which it was saved at the last moment by the election of Biden. But even if START was saved, now the whole construction of nuclear arms control, which was agreed between the United States and the Soviet Union and the United States and Russia, it looks now more or less like a ruin, more a ruin than a functional control system. In 2017 and 2018, by bombing Syria, in spite of the presence there of the Russian forces, Trump has somehow tested the nuclear reflexes of Russia. I believe the same has happened with the threats against North Korea. It was an effort to check the Chinese nuclear reflexes. It is true that those bombings in Syria were less important than one could have been afraid, but before them. But we have strong indications that the only factor which limited the extent of those bombings of Syria was the strong reaction from the United States armed forces themselves. As far as the Middle Eastern and especially Iranian policy of Trump is concerned, this bears also an indirect but clear relationship to its to the new American understanding of the nuclear war, for the simple reason that most probably, if a war with Iran is happening, it will not resemble to the previous wars we have known in the Middle East during 20 years. It will be very probably a kind of mini world war in this region. It will engulf all the region, and it can lead to the use of at least tactical nuclear arms. By the way, since 2005 or 2006, we know from revelations by Seymour Hersh that the contingency plans of the United States armed forces for a war with Iran include also the use of tactical nuclear arms. Somehow, the American interventions in 2001, after 2001 in the Middle East, were a kind of indirect exercise of imperial power, which was directed not directly, it was directed against the peoples of the Middle and the states of the Middle East, but it was also indirectly directed towards all the main powers of the world. If a war in Iran against Iran will take place now, it will be the general, so to say, trial of a world war. In the same way, the occupation of all Europe from Hitler was the introduction to the Second World War. The same period, I mean, under Trump, the United States adopted for the first time officially with the national security, with the national strategy of security in February 2018, the view that the re-emergence of the long-term strategic antagonism with the revisionist powers, they mean Russia and China, means the central challenge to the security and the well-being of the United States. So now we don't have anymore the fight against the small rebel forces in the south. or the fight against terrorism and things like that, we are entering the war with the preparation of a war with China and Russia, cold in principle, but without excluding the possibility of getting into war. By the way, the Trump administration has increased in a very spectacular way the financing for the modernization of the nuclear arms. It has also tested new arms, which are conventional, but with such capacities that they resemble to small nuclear arms. And as Kate has said, it has intensified the turn to the tactical, usable nuclear weapons. But a war is nothing else but the continuation, still is nothing else than the continuation of politics with other means. In order, but it is also it is going this vice versa. If you want to go to a war, you must change ideology. You must change politics in order to make apocalyptic wars possible. Many people worldwide tried to underestimate, the seriousness of what Trump was saying about North Korea, about nuclear weapons, about a lot of other things. Still, I believe this is wrong. This is a wrong interpretation, because it is those declarations, in spite of their incoherence, they have some very serious repercussions. First of all, for the first time since 1945, the world public opinion begins to familiarize itself, and this is the way to legalize the use and the threat of use of nuclear weapons. In 2017, the General Assembly of the United Nations heard, practically without any reaction, President Trump threaten North Korea with whipping it out of the map, a small country of 25 million people. In reality, the incoherence of Trump is the real message of him. On the one hand, his political, yes, I'm finishing. This political discourse, this political meaning is legalizing the use of nuclear force, something unthinkable in the past. But it does something else. He's attacking the very notions of, this is why I say incoherence is in reality his main weapon, because he's attacking the way he's speaking and with the things he's saying, the very sense of logic, of right, of the truth, of morality, of humanism. Those are the main weapons of men to acquire and defend their freedom. And they are also a weapon to impede a disaster. Many other presidents of the United States have attacked the logic, the morals, humanity, and but all of them, they attacked them in practice. They did not attack them in words. He is the first United States president who is attacking frontally the principles of the ideological principles of liberal capitalism. And this way, he's making a radical, he's representing a radical rupture even with capitalist tradition, if we exclude, of course, Hitler, Mussolini, and people like them. In this way, it is a new phenomenon. It is revealing also of the real historical mission Trump came to play, and such forces. You know, in the Roman Empire, there was in the period of Roman decline, there were some emperors like Caligula, for instance. Caligula wanted to make proconsul to make his horse proconsul. The empires of the modern era world have been able to realize it, and this descent into madness is a very worrisome sign, especially as it appears in a center of our world, not in a secondary, after all, country like Germany or Italy. I think that, yes, one phrase.
Yeah, you have to wind up because, you know, as I mentioned, that you have taken around 15 minutes time. Yeah.
15 minutes time.
Yes.
What I had before, you diminished the time, then you made a gift out of respecting you.
Yes.
Okay,
right.
two phrases, if you permit. I think that for the non-aligned movement is a huge opportunity, and it will be taken very easily because most of the non-aligned members are not nuclear powers to make a great return asking for nuclear disarmament. I think that the proposal for a nuclear free zone in the Middle East, it's the right answer to all this war torn, and I would propose also to include Turkey in this Europe without the demand for Europe. Turkey has not to have nuclear arms for both reasons, for belonging to the Middle East and to Europe. Thank you very much.
We'll come back to these issues, Dimitris. Yeah.
Okay, I finished.
When we look for the future, we'll come to your issues. Thank you very much. So I'll not take time. Now I invite Professor Achin Vanaik to make the presentation.
Thank you. I'll be speaking about the geopolitics of the two face-offs, India versus Pakistan and India and China, with reference to the nuclear dimension. And then I'll say something about possible nuclear risk reduction measures. The India-Pakistan face-off, of course, at the heart of this long conflict has been the Kashmir issue, which has been responsible for hot, cold wars, but also for periods of detente. Now what's happened with this new Hindu nationalist government in power in New Delhi, when they eliminated the autonomy of the part of Kashmir in India, it was a clear signal for the first time that forget about detente. You, Pakistan, are the enduring enemy. This is no longer a bilateral dispute. We have this part, we want your part. And this, if you like, is the external counterpart of its anti-Muslim Islamophobic orientation and policies at home. What is more, in very recent times, the situation already terrible from the nuclear point of view between India and Pakistan was made worse. Because do you know that no two nuclear-equipped countries have had air attacks, conventional air attacks with each other? And in fact, in 2019, for the first time since 1945, you had one country, India, nuclearly, sending an attack plane deep into the territory of another nuclear weapons country, which sets a terrible precedent, if you like. And as you know, there is a great ongoing nuclear arms race between the two countries, with the Indians developing triadic deployment under the seas for Pakistan, but also towards China. They've also developed cruise missiles with nuclear warheads to go under radar. And the Pakistanis have said that you, India, have such greater conventional superiority over us, military superiority, that we are making battlefield nuclear weapons to use on our territory. To which the Indian government has said, if you use nuclear weapons against Indian forces anywhere, there will be massive retaliation. The danger between India and Pakistan is what can be called the escalation dynamic. Two sides starting from a position where both say that we, of course, are not going to use nuclear weapons, can, in the context of a conventional conflict, move to a situation where one side starts saying, look, we have to think about preparing and possibly using our nuclear weapons because the other side, and the other side thinks the same. And in fact, in 1999, when you had the conflict, both sides actually prepared their nuclear weapons. Fortunately, for external intervention came and stopped that war from continuing. So you have a very serious situation between India and Pakistan here. What about the India-China relationship? Well, India-China relationship historically is not like the Chinese-Vietnamese relationship, which has had a 1,000-year history of conflict. In India-China, there is no such history. You had a border dispute which is related, if you like, to the former colonial powers demarcating the border, which is not to excuse the way an aggressive China has behaved towards Tibet, or an aggressive India, even in Nehru's times, have behaved towards Kashmir or the Northeast. But this issue could have been solved, this border issue, by give and take on both sides, and even afterwards. But again, when you have Xi Jinping, very aggressive nationalist, and you have Modi as an aggressive nationalist, today the chances of a give and take are not really there. And if you understand the background to what has happened, this becomes much clearer. India is annoyed by people saying that you and Pakistan. They say we are much more important than Pakistan. We don't want to be hyphenated with Pakistan. So for India, the main strategic problem is China. But for China, India is not the main strategic problem, it's the United States. And it reacts to the United States. And this, of course, has problems because India, in order to strengthen itself against China, is very much part of the US policy, the Quad policy of containing China. And on the nuclear level, what does this mean? It means that you have, as others have pointed out, the ballistic missile defense treaty system and the terror missile defense system, which is directed by the US, not at Iran and all that, but at the US, at China and Russia, and they both know it. So what does China and Russia try to do? They try to overload this system by building more nuclear weapons, by putting more nuclear warheads on one missile and making them bigger so they get through. What does this do? This has a knock-on effect on India. So India says the Chinese are going to make more and more, so we have to make more and more, which has a knock-on effect on Pakistan. So the Pakistanis say we have to do it. In other words, you have an arms race between India and Pakistan, which is not even completely under the control of the two governments. This is the kind of situation that you have over here. So what do we do? There are a series of nuclear risk reduction measures that one can suggest, but I will just focus on one for India, Pakistan, one for India, China, and one which I think civil society can take up as an initiative. And this is only because of the lack of time. What can be done with regard to the India-Pakistan conflict at the nuclear level? The Pakistanis have said to India, let's have a no-war pact. The Indians say, but you're having a covert war with your support for groups going into India. Unfortunately, a covert war, no, rather, fortunately, a covert war is not the same thing as a war, which is defined as the official armed forces of a country fighting. And there is still a difference between covert war and overt war. What do the Indians say to the Pakistanis? We have a no first use. You should adopt a no first use. What is a way that they could both move forward? Have a simultaneous no war pact and a simultaneous no first use. You, the Pakistanis, accept the no first use. You, India, accept a no war pact. At least this would ease political tensions to a considerable extent. What about the Indians and the Chinese? Both these countries have a no first use. Unlike other nuclear weapon states, India's no first use actually is inferior to that of the Chinese. It's more qualified. I won't get into that. But they both have a no first use. They both like to present themselves as serious about global nuclear disarmament. We are goody and responsible nuclear powers. So even from their point of view as nuclear powers, they could gain kudos and they could actually make a step in which they could advance themselves in global nuclear diplomacy by both of them coming together and along with a whole host of nuclear, non-nuclear weapon states, host an international conference on no first use to put pressure, if you like, on the other thing. Even if nothing comes about it, at least that's some kind of a pressure. And the Indian and Chinese elite can feel good about it as compared to the others. What's my last nuclear risk reduction proposal for civil society? The one country in Southeast Asia, whose foreign minister officially came out opposing what India and Pakistan did when they went nuclear, was Bangladesh. Nepal didn't do it, the Sri Lankan didn't do it. for obvious reasons. They're worried about big India. But Bangladesh did say, and even said something about a nuclear weapons-free zone. What's my suggestion? My suggestion is use this fact. Let's have an international delegation of parliamentarians opposed to nuclear weapons, along with leaders of the anti-nuclear movements, Kate, Australia, in Southeast Asia, South Asia, have a delegation to meet the official government of Bangladesh, which isn't happy about the Modi government and which knows that if there is a conflict or a nuclear conflict, they're going to get devastated as well. And suggest to them one of two things. One, along with Southeast Asia, consider joining an extended Bangkok Treaty, the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone, or consider having a single state nuclear weapons-free zone like Mongolia, and then invite India and Pakistan to sign this in the way that India is willing, in order to get recognition, to sign the Bangkok Treaty. But of course, they're not asking because that would officially make it a de jure nuclear weapon state. But this is a way of putting pressure. And if Bangladesh was to do one of these two things, it would be a wonderful political slap in the face to two arrogant nuclear weapon states, which endanger South Asia, and not just South Asia, because of nuclear weapons of the world. And this is something that could be done. Jeremy Corbyn and others, for example, here in Southeast Asia, should seriously think of. It shouldn't be difficult to have one delegation to go there and talk to them. And the Indians, Pakistanis won't like it, which is all the more reason why we should move in that particular direction and do something like this. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor
I hope I didn't
Vanaik.
take too much time.
Yes, you didn't take. Yeah, that's great. But we also see a transition in the process of our discussion. Hudson started with optimism. Dimitris had gone to a lot of pessimism. And your presentation gives us some ray of hope if the civil society can take an initiative in this regard. Now I invite Nilofar for her presentation. Only point is that you have to remember your time frame. It's 12 minutes.
Yeah, just tell me after 10 minutes, then I'll wind up, huh?
Okay, yes.
Hello, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Should I begin?
Yes, you begin, yeah.
Okay, hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Davis, the other members of this organization, and those present here for giving me the opportunity to present my views. Well, I have to cut it down to extremely brief manner. I've divided my paper into 3 parts: NAM, nuclear diplomacy, and communication. It is, as I mentioned initially, it's a communication-oriented approach. Now, NAM, as we all know, it was founded by the newly independent powers to assert a strong diplomatic message to the then superpowers, nuclear powers, of their not willing to be aligned with any power. It was a message. Now, diplomatic strategies of this kind are often used between leaders of countries to send a message. The real picture may not be actually so, but the message is sent. But the usage of the word by itself suggests this, the usage of the word movement. A movement doesn't surface immediately by adding the term to any label. It takes years, decades, even generations for it to take the form. But it was, in my understanding at least, the diplomatic strategy linked with the world movement is equivalent to sending a strong message to the nuclear powers, to the superpowers. For instance, I'll just cite brief examples. Leaders of different countries, they exchange diplomatic hugs, handshakes when they meet at different gatherings. It doesn't really imply that their relations are or maybe as cordial as those pictures suggest, but the intention is of sending such a message. So in a way, adding the term movement, it does send a strong diplomatic message to the superpowers. Now, in my paper, when I use the term superpowers, major powers, nuclear powers, they are primarily inclined towards the United States and the powers aligned with it. So NAM, a non-aligned movement, it has the pursuit in the pursuit of global peace, global prosperity, stability, and so forth. In contrast, nuclear diplomacy, it is largely directed towards selecting advantages for a few nations, not for the world as a large. Briefly, I'll give you 3 examples. As has already been pointed out, Arab Spring, Indo-Pak nuclear diplomacy, and terrorism. As for instance, when Arab Spring began, a picture was painted of the West going overboard about the spread of democracy in certain countries. Now, democracy is not a commodity which can be exported or imported. A revolution, a democratic revolution cannot be imposed on any other country by external powers, but that image was painted. Indo-Pak nuclear diplomacy, Professor Vanaik has already talked a lot about it, but I'll take a different communication-oriented approach towards it. When the 2 non-signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty decide to pursue their proliferation drive, the Western media went overboard in projecting a picture of their going overboard towards mutually assured destruction. They were, the explanation is simple, that they were against India and Pakistan becoming nuclear powers. Since they have achieved their nuclear status or near nucleus or whatever the West will think of it as, they have not been engaged in any wide open conflict. Rather, for 30 years, on the 1st of every year, they exchange lists of their nuclear installations and sites against the backdrop of an agreement that they will not attack those. And this agreement, this exchange has taken place even when their relations have not been very cordial or friendly. To a degree, I may say that India, to a great extent, and I presume that stands true for Pakistan also, tends to use the anti-Pak card whenever the parliamentary elections are around the corner to arouse political passion. But that is one side of the picture. What is more important is the West, the communication there, the Western countries, their sources of communication have a tendency to present only a positive image of what they indulge in and a negative image about the third world countries, about their organizations, and this includes NAM also. They painted a positive picture and they went overboard in saying a lot about their Arab Spring, but are rather quiet now that Arab winter, as we all know, has set in. They went overboard in painting a negative picture about India and Pakistan heading for mutually assured destruction, but hardly anything is said about their a large-scale conflict not having taken place since they reached this nuclear understanding. The third point is that of terrorism. Whenever any Black, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Sikh, or a non-white indulges in any act of terrorism in the West, primarily United States of America, the person is immediately labeled as a terrorist, not even as an alleged terrorist. And this perception has been existing for a long time. This also is suggestive of a bias in the American media and how communication there can go overboard in painting a negative image of what the others, the non-whites, even the non-Christians, not Jews, indulge in, but not what the Muslims or the other people of other religions indulge in. No religion is inclined towards terrorism. It doesn't encourage terrorism, but the coining of the word Islamic terrorism, Hindu terrorism are all directed toward this and painting a negative picture. Of course, of late, a trend has begun of going against eroding this concept, but that may take a long time. The same thing happened when in 1992, a controversial mosque was demolished in America. While studying there, I watched the live telecast. Immediately, the West, the American media particularly, went overboard in painting that a picture of Hindu terrorism. In my writings, in my interviews, I raised my voice against it just because a percentage of the Hindu population has indulged in terrorism. You can't paint the entire Hindu community as terrorists, such as when a Muslim acts in terrorism, the entire community can't be labeled as terrorists, but there is the tendency. Now, how do we link this with communication? The third aspect of my paper. We must accept the fact that the West, particularly United States, its tools of communication, they are more widespread and developed than are those of other countries. The other countries tend to rely on whatever the West says about what is happening in other parts of the country. When Arab Spring, when the image of Arab Spring was presented by the Western media, most parts of the other world, they accepted it as such. Not substantial importance was given by them to exploring as to what the Arab countries were really saying so, whether their media was also using the terms Arab Spring as was being presented by American media. No, the same thing can be said about terrorism or other aspects, negative aspects of news about the third world presented by the Western media. Now, where does this place NAM in? I think in recent past, chances of NAM moving in a more progressive are there, in a more progressive manner are strongly there. One, I'll see the very fact that NAM has been in existence for a long time, that by itself is a sign of it being a strong organization, stronger than as is perceived and presented by the West, number one. Number two, the very fact that conferences and gathering of these kind frequently are occurring, that in itself is another positive sign. Three, of late, speculations are in the air of certain European nations considering the option of going the NAM way. And this is due to the tension between United States and China as well as Russia. These European countries do not want to risk their ties with United States rivals simply on account of pursuing what Washington asks them to. So the safer option being considered by them is that of going the NAM way. Another example, the leaders of the countries who had earlier gone overboard in displaying their friendly ties with the former Republican president are now considering the options of playing a more active role within the NAM organization. This, in their perception, seems to be a safe way of wriggling themselves out of a tight situation. So the NAM has a long way to go. It has come a long way. What it needs to be done is greater importance needs to be given by the NAM members to exercising their respective communication strategies. If they do, it is possible they may, the whole world needs to accept that yes, nuclear power, or what is being presented by nuclear powers, what is being pursued by nuclear diplomacy, that in all ways may not be the exact picture. As I mentioned in the beginning, nuclear diplomacy is targeted towards select ends in contrast to the aims and pursuits of AM. So as a journalist, as a writer, this is what I perceive, that nuclear diplomacy, yes, it is here, but NAM too has a long way to go. All we need is a stronger and more aggressive use of its communication strategies. With it being the covert phase, I think even the nuclear powers are not as assertive as they had seemed to be earlier. The timing is just perfect. The very fact that certain European nations are also considering the option of going the NAM way, the advantage is for the NAM to exercise its communication strategies more actively. Yes, it is a positive note.
Okay.
In being positive about something which seems possible in the long run. So I think I can see Professor Akhil's face.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Nilofar. Yeah, you have, presented within the given time frame. Thank you very much. So now I invite, I don't know how to pronounce, as I see in the screen, I'll invite Azril Bakal. Am I pronouncing your name?
Good enough. Good enough.
Good enough. Yeah. So over to you, sir. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers, and in particular to Professor Beatriz Vicio, historian from Brazil, an old friend, for inviting me, and listening to you has been quite enlightening. It has helped me to frame my thoughts on the matter from a Latin American perspective in a multipolar world. So looking at arms control and disarmament from a particular view on structures and cultures of peace. And this has to do with the cultural, educational, ideological dimension of the problem. So I look at the background and my aim against that background. And I started to think along these days that we are facing a new health and political order. And this is it's a crisis of the 21st century. So I start by looking at globalism. I came acquainted with this concept from Professor Uman from India, and he was using globalism because it rhymes with colonialism and neocolonialism as a critique of neoliberal globalization. And so I was part of that project on citizenship, national identity, writing the Latin American chapter. So one key issue of this crisis, I focus on extractivism. And I'm sure my colleagues, my distinguished colleagues in the panel know what it is about. And then looking at forestry and environmental devastation. If you want to focus, the Amazon region with 9 surrounding countries, and Brazil playing a key strategic role in the destruction of Amazons that threatens all of us. So against this background of globalism and the world crisis of the 21st century, how do we indicate, what evidence do we have? Then we have zoonotic diseases. And COVID-19 is just one of them, Ebola, influenzas, and the danger of similar or worse pandemics coming because of the way we produce, for example, meat. So if you have a high concentration of animals and high concentration of people in cities, the probability of zoonotic diseases increases asymptotically. So we have global warming, we have global regional militarism, and I'm trying to encapsulate all these problems in terms of weapons control and disarmament. I think we're living in a global, balkanized world. And this is a complex vision of that. And a key element is the growth of global and regional inequalities. I think this is one of the key explanations for pandemics, for global warming, and so on. And this is dramatically reflected in the expulsion of tens of millions, about 70 million refugees from their homes and countries. And in response to that, we have the growth of racism, nationalist populism, and here I make a connection. Similar to the post-world crisis in the 30s of the capitalist system, we're watching a development of national populism, reminiscent of the move towards fascism and Nazism as a way to resolve the crisis, not to the left, but to the extreme right. And I think we're confronting this issue now in front of us. And one element that I mentioned before yesterday is the element of cultural war. I think NAM, as part of NAM, because there are not many countries today supporting NAM, but we are more like inheritors of the NAM tradition and perspectives. And Steve Bannon, one of the key players, one of the engineers of the mind, if one thinks of Gramsci, he defines the campaign that brought Trump, even Bolsonaro. You could say maybe Modi was along the same steps. Culture was the battle for the mind. And this battle is being won right now by extreme right forces, by national populism, whatever you want to call it. Along with this, we have globalization of crime and arms trade. So my aim is to provide an overview of past, present, and future trends in Latin America related to arms control and disarmament. So if we look at NATO, as Kate pointed out, we can say that TRIAR, it's the equivalent of NATO in Latin America. And TRIAR was behind the military coups beginning in the mid-60s in Brazil, and then Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and you name it. So we have in Latin America a similar infrastructure like NATO that has to do with the problem of weapons and disarmament. So I'm trying to keep my time. Coming from Peru, I am tempted to imitate Dimitris, but I won't because I've been domesticated in Sweden. So I'll try to keep my time. So one big lesson from the past is that we are still part of the problem and not only part of the solutions to the problems we're looking at. It is a humbling statement. And then we need to look into the future. So we need to rescue the sense of hope that is associated with critical and utopian thought, with popular resistance and the struggle for democracy, but not the bourgeois democracy. It's a democracy that delivers justice, dignity, and peace. Dignity is a key concept that the Zapatistas have raised in Chiapas that has to do with identity, which has been named in previous discussions during this Congress. So we want peace is not the peace of the colonizer that makes people suffer, but it recognizes the equal value of all human beings. So also I think we need to learn from the damage of the political endophagia, divisiveness of the historical left up to our days that works against the united left needed to confront the capitalist world system, using Wallenstein's definition of the last 500 years. And while we often speak about the bipolar world in the beginning, in the roots of NAM, between the two superpowers in the 20th century, we tend to neglect the internal conflicts, rivalries, for example, between Stalin and Trotsky, Stalin, Soviet Union, Mao's China, who was also reflected at NAM, for example, at the Tricontinental, where China had the upper hand in Havana. So a challenge for us in the future is how to listen to each other and resolve our differences concerning the future agenda and concerted action, very basic concerted action of NAM through respect and dialogue. Easier said than done, because it remains a formidable and humbling challenge and task. How we manage the latter will be reflected on how we deal with the issues of arms control and disarmament in the future. In my view, there are not good and bad arms if related to their right or left in the political spectrum. So another world without war is possible if and only if we learn to process and resolve conflict by political means and negotiation. As Gandhi said, the logic of an eye for an eye will make us all blind. In other words, the future of zero-sum games is over in the nuclear age. I would like to evoke the image of 18-year-old Greta when she screams to the world, to the powers in the world. She says, our home is on fire, whether nuclear or not. So make the association with what we're dealing with to make people aware, the consciousness raising that Paulo Freire tried in his legacy, in his lifetime, it's how to envision and then work towards a denuclearized world or a world without arms. Peter Nobel from the Nobel family was the first Swedish ethnic ombudsman, and he started to formulate an idea to criminalize the production and sale of weapons. What about this as a campaign? At the moral level, but we have spoken about moral force, and this is what brought an end to slavery in the UK. It was the Quakers with moral force. So there is something for us there. I want to thank Kate for summarizing the nuclear dilemmas, and she mentioned something that links to Sweden and then to Peru, as I would try to point, trying to keep my time, which is very difficult. The nuclear role of non-nuclear countries like Sweden. Well, Sweden cooperates with NATO in a lot of field exercises in the north of Sweden. They're also trying to extract uranium. So what is the link between Sweden, in addition to selling 36 Jas Gripen planes to Brazil, impoverished Brazil, before Bolsonaro? Well, Swedish pensioners' funds are invested in mines, in gold mines in Peru. So that's a way to look at how globalized we are in this frame. Now, I will not go on to list the perspectives that inspired this, but I have sent my abstract and outline. So let's summarize the regional context of inequality, where Brazil and Mexico, according to World Bank figures, are the most unequal countries in the world. And that means a structural violence. So, and here we have the confrontation between two poles. The Pan-American Union, controlled under the shadow of the United States, TRIA as its military arm, and then we have CELA with S, the Grupo de Puebla, what Bolivia today represents, and I think Bolivia should be a prototype of NAM in today's Latin America, with Arce and David Choquehuanca in power. And I want to mention José Mujica. Pepe Mujica, former president of Uruguay, is emblematic, like Nyerere was in Tanzania, because of his wholesome. We need that kind of emblematic figures. To finish the idea of the context, the idea of the state and criminal violence. According to today's news in The Guardian, 331 human rights defenders were killed last year. 2/3 for protecting environment, land, and indigenous people's rights. Latin America is the most dangerous continent in the world. 3/4 of these murders take place in Colombia, Honduras, Brazil, and Guatemala. We see militarization in Bolsonaro's Brazil, Duque's Colombia, and even AMLO in Mexico. I should stop now, and I would say that a vision of another possible Latin America in terms of disarmament for sustainable human development, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, better health and quality education for all, thinking of, the idea of culture of peace was coined by Felipe MacGregor, a Peruvian Jesuit, and then taken by UNESCO. And I finish by saying that the spirit of Bandung was well represented at the World Social Forum by Samir Amin, who we miss dearly. The World Social Forum is regarded as a gift of hope from Latin America, added to a vision of other possible worlds based on democracy, justice, dignity, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azril Bakal. Again, I'm not very sure about whether I'm pronouncing your name correctly or not. So we had so we had 5 presentations, and this has been a very enriching articulations on the part of the speakers. And as we traveled from Hudson to Azril, it has moved from one standpoint to that of the other standpoints, even though there have been a lot of similarities. And also, if you look at, we have also traveled in in territorial terms too, from Europe, from Britain to Middle East, to South Asia, then to Latin America. And keeping in mind the locations, the speakers have given very interesting perspectives. Now it is open for discussion. And I think our point of discussion should also focus on what is the way ahead. For example, Professor Vanaik has given his very interesting articulations on how to make Southeast Asia a nuclear zone, nuclear-free zone. Same is the case with Dimitris, who has talked about the Middle East Middle East nuclear-free zone, including Turkey. And Hudson, of course, she has been campaigning against armaments. She has been doing it professionally. She has a lot of understanding on it. Therefore, I open the floor for discussion now. Discussion could be among the panelists, and discussion could also be moved by the other participants. Yes, Nilofar, you have to be short and precise, yeah.
So I have to make a point about my communication-oriented aspect. If we note recently, the President NAM chair, he made a point about COVID vaccines distribution. He said that the distribution was very undemocratic and unequal. His statements have not received practically any coverage. It's an important point, but it's been covered largely by his own local and regional media. Had perhaps the American president or someone else in the West made the same point, made the same statement, that would have certainly received a far greater communication coverage. So this is, this is putting it more simply, the communication-oriented approach of the NAM countries need to be given greater importance by
okay, great. So NAM has to build up a counter hegemony as far as the communication is concerned. Over to Hudson. Would you like to, after listening to the other presentations, would you like to add from your end? Yeah.
Just to say, Akhil, the message of the nuclear weapons-free zone, that's coming through very strongly from the contributions. It's a renewed focus here in Europe. We've always taken inspiration from the global south, and it seems that there are new initiatives towards the nuclear weapons-free zones, not only in the Middle East, which is sanctioned, of course, by the UN General Assembly, but now, of course, India and Bangladesh, those suggestions coming through too. So I think that's a very fruitful area for further discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Dimitris, would you like to add to your presentations?
Yes.
How optimistic are you? If you go through your presentation, you are not very optimistic about the future.
I think everyone has to draw optimism from his own action.
Okay.
It does not make sense to debate about optimism or pessimism. It makes sense to do things in order to change the world. So if we can take practical initiatives, it would be very good. I don't know exactly the possibilities of the organizers of this conference, but I hope they can move and we can help them. in those directions, like preparing, trying to persuade at least some of the members of the non-aligned movement to move into this direction. I give enormous importance to the question of propaganda for a Middle East zone, because this is a counterweight to one of the main aims of imperialism, that is to go to war with Iran. And I think that the COVID situation gives us a very good new argument to try to create a serious international movement against sanctions. Sanctions is not exactly in the field of arms control and disarmament, but it has become a main economic, a main weapon of economic war. So it has to be stopped, especially in conditions of pandemic. And I think such a campaign connected with the corona problem and the problems that this lack of cooperation and different vaccine wars and propaganda wars around COVID are creating to the health problem, it can have a very large echo around the world. At least I hope this.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question both to Dimitris and also Professor Vanaik. Both of you mentioned about the imperialism, either directly or indirectly. How does regime changes in the imperialist centers, particularly in the US, contribute towards intensification and, for that matter, reduction of the armaments? Over to Professor Vanaik. Yeah.
Only to a very limited extent. The nature of but to a certain extent, it's important. The fact that Biden is there rather than Trump makes it somewhat easier for the Iran issue to be resolved in a more positive manner. However, Biden is unlikely to go straight away back to that. He seems to be willing to play or to try and appease Israel to a certain extent by insisting that, no, we can't go back, but you have to concede more because you're also doing stuff politically that we don't like, but we, of course, will carry on doing what we want politically. So it's difficult, it's tricky, but it does make some limited change. I can't say more than that. I'm very supportive of the Middle East weapons of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction, but it's going to be much more difficult there because Israel is the huge stumbling block. It officially doesn't say it's opposed to this, but says you have to resolve the Palestinian question first. And of course, that's not happening precisely because of Israel. There are a lot of nuclear risk reduction measures that we can put forward, but they're really geared towards the public, to try to generate consciousness and understanding so that you can resist. But even those measures which are presented for governments to take up, there are variations in the extent to how difficult it is or not. The reason I suggested the international delegation to Bangladesh is because it is much easier than bringing about a nuclear weapons-free zone in Middle East and all that, but we should do that here. So, but as for the imperialist question, will Biden get rid of the BMD and TMD? What happens is that things that were considered possible in the past have become more difficult now, even as regimes have changed, especially in the United States. There's a general rightward shift, and even the center has also shifted. So it's more difficult. It's public pressure that really can reverse the situation rather than changes of regime.
Okay, thank you very much. Azril also brought about the issues of dignity and structural violence while talking about the armament question. So he wants to elaborate a couple of points.
Yeah.
Over to Azril. Yeah.
Speaking as a Peruvian, there was a time that Peru was very actively engaged with Vietnam. This is between 1968, 69, and 74. during the Velasco regime. And this is the so-called Edgardo Mercado doctrine of regional security, which was in contrast opposition to TIAR, the militaristic branch arm of the Pan-American Union. So it's good to keep that in mind. There was that time. In Mexico, there were different initiatives like SESTEM and so on. And Brazil played an active role during the foreign minister Celso Amorim at Itamaraty. Was a very active global player, also in South cooperation. I wanted to make a small note to the issue of that Kate so brilliantly presented. You know, in the 80s, Latin America became a nuclear-free region thanks to the active work of Ambassador Robles in Mexico, who got a Nobel Prize, with Alva Myrdal. And this allows me to comment on the issue of gender, because Alva Myrdal had succeeded in bringing to Geneva the agreement to prohibit nuclear weapons in the 80s. And then she was stopped from the British office in the UK. They phoned the foreign minister in Sweden with the message, stop that woman. This you can read in Alva Myrdal's notes, biographical notes. And so stop that woman, you know, that outspoken woman, Alva Myrdal, that we should remember as we speak of nuclear-free weapons. Final note has to do with NATO, Turkey being part of NATO. When Turkey invades northern Syria and the world looks at it, it was not just exercise, a military exercise. It was an attempt to quench what can be seen as one of the most interesting process in this century of people's assembly democracy. I'm speaking about Rojava, the Kurdish, but not only Kurdish, it called for different, and a lot of women's participation in a kind of participatory local, maybe reminiscent of the Paris Commune. And this experiment then was quenched by Turkey, meaning NATO, with NATO and European complacency, European paying Erdogan to take care, in quotes, for these millions or thousands of refugees that are being stopped from coming to Fortress Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would Hudson like to add anything?
May I add something?
Okay. Yeah, you have to give the concluding remarks.
Okay.
Yeah, as the co-chair, you'll be giving the concluding remarks. I was just asking Hudson, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think Hudson, yeah. Can you hear me, Hudson? Okay. So is there any question from the participants? I can see Devon at least. If Devon is there, would you like to add anything? Or others? Okay. So should we come to an end of it and Gracjan can give the concluding remarks? So we have crossed our given time. Yeah.
I want something also add.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. There's just one little thing I wanted to say, that we always need to consider the environment as well. I don't know how much our leaders care about the environment, but a lot of these weapons, especially the nuclear ones, do have very terrible environmental consequences. And I don't know how much that can also help in the fight in terms
against
of
armament. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So over to you, Gracjan.
Okay, thank you. So I make a short comment. When I think that all panelists gave interesting speech and show different perspective on critical view about our main topic. But to summarize and give a synthesis, I think that we have heard many facts, many critical facts about military idea, weapon, and especially the first two panelists. And next, we also could heard some new perspective, the way we should act in the future. And I think that synthesis of those speeches may be developing of so-called strategic communication, which was mentioned here. And I think that history is now accelerate, and every critical movement, non-alignment movement, and every movement which are against this neo-colonial practice, neoliberalism, and defender of unipolar moment, which we observe now at the global stage, we should focus on developing strategic communications. And as I had this analysis, in my mind, there was idea that, for instance, we should develop the password. For instance, health instead of weapons, health instead of weapons, which are very actual now. And I think the movement and every on the state stage or social state or other movement should very fast react to negative processes which we are observe, and organize some kinds of virtual meetings which are based on this kind of strategic communications, which may, for instance, will gather people in the call for health instead of weapons. Because we gather in this conference and the books many critical issues, critical data, and pessimistic visions, especially when you observe what is happening now. But we should be more active, and I think that would be good skill for developing a better future and give us a hope as latest panelists highlight. Thank you. I see that Akhil wants to add something. Yes, please.
Well, maybe I wasn't, but I can say something. It's about raising people's consciousness. It's thinking along Paulo Freire or Gramsci. It's the battle for the mind.
Yes.
And while we have a nuclear-free region in Latin America, the issue of nuclear or non-nuclear, it's very far removed from the minds of people bent on survival. When you need to survive from day to day through informal economy, that's most of the economic activity in Latin America, then it is an issue removed from awareness. It's like nuclear issues are problems for the rich countries. So how to link issues like the prohibition of nuclear arms to everyday issues, I think that link should be clear. For example, in Brazil, with Bolsonaro support, they are trying to activate a uranium mine in a very important region of Brazil that will contaminate water, will contaminate health, cancer, everything related to it. So there is a campaign to make Brazilian people aware of the dangers of nuclear residues related to the extraction of uranium. So that could be a way, using the term you used, a strategic communication, to make the link between the concrete mining of uranium, the dangers of managing residues in general, with the issue of denuclearization.
I think that is very important that we observe, as Gramsci teach us 100 years ago, permanent struggle of our minds. And the strategic communication is, of course, the new name for this struggle, which is a tool for corporations and hegemonical states to win in this struggle. For instance, I may add something about Poland. We now observe many anti-government movements, but the old password, the old ideas are gathered that they are fighting for a free market because of corporations and government destroy the free market. They don't realize that there are no free market. This ideology for developing of corporations, but it means that the struggle, hegemonical struggle, was won by corporations in Poland. So I think that it isn't only a problem of Polish society. Thank you.
We have almost we have taken more time than which was allotted to us. So should we come to an end of this session? Okay, so I take the privilege along with my co-chair to thank all speakers for such a comprehensive presentation, which has been very critical, illuminating, and also for providing us an insight for the roadmap ahead. On behalf of the conference, Rise of Asia conference, I again take the privilege to thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next session will be 3 o'clock French time.